What's up, YouTube? Welcome back. So let's talk about validation. All right. So validation, the word has been thrown around a bit much lately, and partially because of the whole Aisha Curry situation. Everybody and they black mama on black social media, especially black YouTube, got something to say about validation all of a sudden, right? And it's really interesting um, how this is all sort of low-key playing out, because folks are saying, oh, you should only want validation from this source, or want validation from that source, or your validation should come from within. And those things do have validity, but I don't think everyone's really taking in the whole situation, though. um, so I'm going to define validation right quick. There's a few definitions, but here it goes. The action of checking or proving the validity or accuracy of something. Okay, so that's one definition. Next would be the action of making or declaring something legally or officially acceptable. Okay. Third definition. Recognition or affirmation that a person or their feelings or opinions are valid or worthwhile. So I think we all want some validation, just as just being human beings. I think we do in some way, right? Now, as far as who we want validation from and how we go about getting it, those are definitely conversations to be had too. But, validation, and I guess I can just keep this validation in terms of colorism, like, within the colorism conversation, because I think that's where I'm really coming from with this more so. Some people are speaking about validation just in relationships, and that's definitely, an interesting conversation. But this conversation that I'm going to have is going to be more so centered around validation and colorism. Okay. So, everybody in the community, wants some form of validation one way or another. And I don't think anything is wrong with that, you know. And if someone makes you feel like there's something wrong with having some form of validation outside of yourself, then that person is suspect, you know. Everybody in this community wants some form of validation or another. All groups, in this community want some form of validation or another. The thing is, they tend to get it. The folks who are saying that, oh, it should come from within, or you shouldn't need validation. Usually they're the ones that are getting it in some form, right? So it's easy for them to say that because they're not in the situation that other folks who aren't getting it are in, right? And, I did a video a little while back about black women, not black men, come in all shades. And in the comment section, this guy, brown skinned, dark skinned man who was subscribed to me for a while, had said something to the effect like, oh, you shouldn't want, or you need black men to validate your blackness. And I'm like, well, I never mentioned that in the video about wanting some black men to validate my blackness. I was just speaking on the fact that, I'm noticing a trend. I'm noticing a pattern when it comes to colorism and who is black and who is perhaps not black, and that sort of a thing, right? But of course, in order to deflect and to avoid having to have a real conversation about this, you just flip it around and put it on me. I'm the problem. Like, no, I'm not the problem. I'm calling out the problem. right? I don't have the problem. I'm calling out the problem. And this video, the video was not for me to try and get, the stamp of approval of, some random low level brown skin, dark skin brother. All right. And no shade to him. He's been subscribed for a while. But still. But also he pulled the same shit in another video that I did about, Divine Dark Skin magazine, right? And I had said, oh, where is Chrissy's Black Queen trophy at for doing, putting all this together? And then he came in the mix, right, and said, let me see, I think I can actually pull this comment up. And he said, quote unquote, Chrissy started semi-promoting swirling and berating dark-skinned black men. She also excluded about 50% of women that identify black but may not be dark-skinned. So her trophy, validation in this case, should come from dark-skinned black women, of which she is exclusively promoting. And I just find that really interesting that it's like, oh, you should validate yourself. You shouldn't need validation from other sources of people or other sources. And it's almost like people are sort of expecting, the brown skin and dark skin women to be an entity of themselves. Like, let me see, how can I put this? Like, they want them to be strong and independent. Be strong and independent of their obligations to them. Want them to be strong and independent of pretty much everything, right? The validation, we don't want to validate your beauty. We don't feel like that. Protecting you, right? Pretty much, providing for you. Pretty much this, that, and the third, except for dick. That's pretty. They'll provide that for you. Shit, they'll provide that for you though. Shit. Everything else, you on your own. Shit, there's always something, right? But yeah, I find that really interesting. And again, coming from a dark skinned, brown skinned brother, right? Surprise, surprise, right? Talking about, all skin tones matter and all this shit, but you don't have, like, you can't, muster up some empathy or sympathy for, women who are reflective of you, but all skin tones matter, though, right? All right. Fuck out of here. All right. So I'm going to go down the list of, like, I'm going to go down the colorism hierarchy as far as, like, validation is concerned, all right? So let's start with brown skin and dark skin black men. Like, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the way that I see it, like, these niggas depend on validation like oxygen. Like, if they ain't have validation, they would be dead. All right? They would be dead somewhere. Somewhere dead. All right? Like, they get validation, maybe not for what they do because they don't do shit. Men are supposed to typically get validation from their actions and, their deeds and, their, like, production of, you know what I mean, like, for what they do, their actions, but in the community, the brown skin, dark skin men tend to get more validation based on looks and beauty, right? Coming primarily from brown skin and dark skin black women. I'm sure there's some, light skin mixed chicks in the mix too. So I find that really interesting. But then again, my personal theory is that, feminine energy and masculine energy play on each other. So sometimes I feel like, when these niggas are acting on some low-key feminist shit, then the dark-skinned women come through with some low-key masculine shit. It's sort of like, I think if the brown-skinned and dark-skinned women were really, in the presence of Like basically, if they were exposed to some strong masculine energy, then that would activate their feminine energy more, and you would see more femininity. Because some folks saying, "Oh well, y'all ain't feminine," referring to brown skin and dark skinned women. Well, it's like, well, are you really giving them something to be feminine about? You know, in order to survive, sometimes you do have to switch things up. If you're in a situation where, you know, people are being attacked, you can't be all like friendly and, hospitable. You got to be like aggressive and cutthroat to survive. So that's where I'm coming from with it. So if they's complaining about, brown skin and dark skin and black women being masculine, then they're probably, what you're picking up on is probably them being masculine because they've been, surrounded with so much of your feminine energy that they just like, well, shit, someone gotta be a man around here. No shade, just saying. All right. So yeah, those dudes, they depend on this validation like oxygen, okay? And as quiet as it's kept, a lot of them don't get the validation from that whole, the dark skin, super masculine mandingo, you know, stereotype thing that they got going on. Because sometimes then we get into the whole educated lame argument, right? Because would that even exist if this whole stereotype applied across the board? I don't think so. Because even in the media, there's some dark skinned, brown skinned men that, the women go crazy over, and then there's some that they don't go crazy over, right? You know, same with the biracial mixed chicks. There's some biracial mixed women that, the guys go crazy over, and then there's some that, shit. And speaking of biracial mixed and light skinned women, they get their validation from primarily brown skin and dark skinned black men. I don't think any other group of men are really validating them all that much, especially like any non-black men. No, like their beauty isn't validated by non-black men, not like that, right? So they depend on validation too from brown skin and dark skinned black men, and perhaps even brown skin and dark skinned black women to an extent. Think about that, you know. So, hopefully I don't see any biracial mixed light skinned chicks in the mix saying, coming at brown skin and dark skinned black women for wanting some form of validation, right? And, I guess we can move on to the brown skin, or no, the light skin mixed biracial men, right? As far as this community is concerned, there's not really much of a validation, on like a collective level. I don't really see that coming all that much from the community. Thankfully, we don't depend on that shit like oxygen, so we can survive without it. Of course, I'm sure that many would be appreciative of it, to receive it from the community. But that's, it's not going to happen. Well, I should say I don't expect that to happen anytime soon, right? So instead of just, being all dejected and looking miserable and pathetic and shit, just move on. Just keep it moving, And as well, I suppose I'm speaking about the beauty validation shit, But, there are some forms of validation that light-skinned mixed biracial dudes do get, but it's more so about what they do, which is in line with being men, assuming and having a masculine energy and masculine role. So that is in line, oddly enough. Something to think about. So, like, Barack Obama, right? Or, what's his name? Colin Kaepernick, or Jesse Williams, LeVar Ball, right? couple of examples right there, right? But yeah, this community, it's just, it's just like too bad, too sad when it comes to the light skinned mixed biracial men. It's like, too bad, too sad. There's no participation trophies for like light skinned mixed biracial men. It's just like, hell, if you ain't win, you ain't win. When it comes to the brown skinned, dark skinned women, then they were like, oh, your black is beautiful. All shades matter. Here's your participation trophy. You're a winner too. Not really, but you're a winner too, right? They know they kind of placate and pacify and, make sure that the brown skinned, dark skinned black women, don't get the feeling that they ain't appreciated, and that they're being taken for granted, which they're not appreciated and which they are being taken for granted. But they make sure to give them just enough to keep them hanging on, right? Just enough, right? And they humor them with that shit, right? Notice they don't really humor, like folks don't really humor light-skinned mixed biracial men with that shit, which ultimately works out because it's like, hey, if you on some fuck shit, just be real about it, right? Don't be trying to be shady and duck and hide and, have some smoke and mirrors and all this shit. Just be upfront with it, right? So at least you know who and what you're dealing with, right? When it comes to the brown skin, dark skin, black women, I tend to see them getting more so uplifted for what they do versus how they look. And not to say that they don't look good, which by and large they do, but it's just like the looks aren't being acknowledged for some reason. And again, this is acknowledgement primarily from their brown skin, dark skin male counterparts, right? So it's like, well, where's that acknowledgement that it's like they're not returning and reciprocating as much? Like the brown skin, dark skin women, they're going, gaga goo goo crazy. It's almost really a performance if you really think about it. I thought about making a video about that. But yeah, the whole performance of, black women finding dark-skinned black men attractive, it's really low-key a performance to appear to be pro-black a lot of the times. Maybe not all the time, but a lot of times I think that's a part of it, like trying to just appear to be pro-black. But, when it comes to the women, or when it comes to the men reciprocating that for the women, that does not seem to be as strong of a determinant, if you will. Although some black men will come through and be like, oh, I love brown skin, dark skin, black women with natural hair, right? And I'm not saying that those men don't exist, because they do, but sometimes I feel like folks just come through with some pretty words just so they can get motherfuckers to clap for them and to be like, oh, you're one of the good ones. Some low-key, kind of like seeking some low-key validation on that shit, too. I could be wrong, but I see that happening, too. But the brown-skinned, dark-skinned women are getting validation based on what they do. Like, oh, you climbed the Statue of Liberty. Oh, you tore down a Confederate statue or monument. Oh, you started Black Lives Matter. Oh, you faced down the cops. And got your ass whooped by the cops or some shit. And it's just like, I mean, but that's what, seeking validation. And the women probably don't even think that that's the reason, but I think that's a part of the reason, why they're doing what they're doing. Maybe not all of the reason, but part of the reason that they're behaving the way that they're behaving, because they want some validation in one form or another, right? But again, brown skin and dark skin black men have the key to get brown skin and dark skin women out of this situation that they're in. They're not going to use that key, as well as brown skin, dark skin, black women have the key to get themselves out of the situation that they're in, but they're not going to use that key either. So it's just a whole bunch of motherfuckers just in jail cells with keys to get out of the jail cells. And they're wondering, how do I get out of this jail cell? And folks are like, well, you have the key, just open the jail cell and get out. But they don't know they got the key, I guess. I think that's probably the issue. You know, kind of like the Wizard of Oz. You know, Dorothy didn't know that she had what she needed to get back home. She had to go through the whole journey to figure out, oh, I had what I needed all along. Like, why didn't anyone tell me that? Shit. But I'm going to bring this video to a close. This video was a bit of a rant. A bit all over the place. My bad. But hopefully you was able to get something from it. If not, come back next time. Until the next video, adios and goodbye for now.